So we are here on today's Talking Tuesday with Samantha Maybon. And Samantha is our clinician who's going to help us dive into the Talking Tuesday topic of sexual trauma and PTSD in the Black community. I want to remind you that Get the Word Out is brought to us by two separate nonprofits. That's Crown Services Incorporated. And Crown Services is looking to support children and families that are in foster care with non-traditional services like hair care, culturally sensitive food recipes. I'm recording. Culturally sensitive food recipes, and bonding support. So that's Crown Services. And then the other nonprofit is We Are One Purpose. And We Are One Purpose seeks to really support the community as a whole and how our community looks, our roads, our homeless population, our homeless adults that are living on Skid Row, and our families are out there. So these two nonprofits are coming together because at the end of the day, we are still trying to educate, unite, and empower our community, just in different aspects of the community. But both are very needed. So that's what we're here to do today. And we're going to jump into sexual trauma and PTSD with Samantha. So Sam, can you just let everybody know what your background is and where you're coming from? You're on mute, ma'am. Sam.
Okay. Hi. All right. My name is Samantha Maybon. I have been working in this field for probably about 25 years. I've worked with kids who have suffered. I worked out at Challenger. We got an array of kids who have suffered from all types of abuse. But sexual abuse was one that was not always talked about. I also was a foster mother from 2000. No, I'm sorry, not 2000, from 1999 to 2017, where I did foster care and I took these kids in my home who, at that time, I didn't understand why they were so angry, what made these kids act out like that. Later on in my life, I decided that I wanted to go to school. And I wanted to be a social worker in the beginning because I wanted to help some of these kids who I felt were not getting a fair shot. I ended up, however, in mental health, where I became a mental health therapist, where I am currently an AMFT working on my license. I have an intern license, and I've been doing that for the past 4 years. Almost 5. I work with kids that are sexually abused. I work with parents who have been sexually abused, and who feel that it's okay for their kid, to get over it. A lot of times in the Black community, what I have noticed is that we tend to say, "Hey, okay, that happened, move on." But what I want you guys to know is that PTSD is real. Sexual abuse is real. And everybody can't just move on. We need to be able to process what happened to us and then move on. And if you haven't processed, if you don't process, if you know somebody that's still angry, that is still emotionally unaware of the things that they do, then that person needs to process. How do we process? There's many ways to process. What sexual abuse is, and here's the thing: what sexual abuse is when somebody violates someone else. Kids do not give consent for sex. So if a kid is having sex with an adult, that is sexual abuse. It's molestation. It's against their will. Anytime something is being forced on you, it's a violation of your body.
I think that's something I think that's really good to point out, Sam, that even if it's a child and they seem like they're willing and they're consenting, they cannot consent because of their age. And it's
Right.
still abuse, and we're still forcing them and manipulating them to engage in an act that they're not ready for. So I think I'd like to stress that point
Yeah.
because I've heard attackers in the past that say things like, oh, well, this person wanted it, or, they knew what they were doing, or, they will like it, after a while. So I think it's very, even when we see children, sometimes you can even go into that discussion about how times we'll see children become attackers and predators themselves.
Victimized, yes.
Yes, yes,
Victimized.
yes.
Well, and the one thing I wanted to say on that is that even if a kid gave their consent, it's still abuse because the kids don't know what they're consenting to. They don't understand, even if it made their body feel good. Um, they don't know that that's wrong to do. It's laws and rules for a reason because, see, what happens is a kid's mind is not able to handle what comes along with that. That's why they call it abuse because your mind is not able to, when you are, having these symptoms of a lot of kids you see on the street that you see are trying to self-medicate. They're trying to make themselves feel good about things that about their body being violated. So instead they go get on drugs, they prostitute, they sell themselves, and those are some of the reasons. So those are some of the signs and symptoms that you will see happening in our youth today. The anger, the drug use, trafficking, and a lot of times the one thing that I want to make known and put out there is a lot of kids feel like it's their fault. They did it in some type of way. They invited that to be done to them. What I want to say is that it's never your fault for somebody to violate your body. Never, never. Um, that's something that's in that person. That person may have a mental illness. That person may have been done like that themselves because that happens. When we quote that statement, "Victims victimize," is a true statement. Um, you tend to normalize things by things that have happened to you, and it's not normal. So that's the one thing that you got to remember. Um, I did read that. Um, I want to just give you a few numbers
Okay.
that the legal consent age varies from state to state, but 16 to 18 is the number of the age that where someone can consent to sexual intercourse. Um, that does not that's not recognizing if someone is developmentally capable of making those decisions. However, there's an age. If there's a 16-year-old um, with a I'm gonna say a 14-year-old with a 22-year-old, that's still, even though that child may know how to make some decisions because the age varies from state to state, that don't mean that kid is cognitively aware, knows that don't mean that they are aware of what is really happening. That don't mean they know how to deal with the emotion that comes along with intercourse of someone physically invading your body. So um, they also they the studies show that um, substance abuse, misuse, mental illness, depression, suicide ideation, fear of authority figures, including teachers, professional, undiagnosed physical illnesses, chronic pain, school dropout, homelessness, are all at risk of sexual assault, even as an adult, not just as a kid, but even as an adult. Uh, Adults get sexually abused also. And um, sometimes they get sexually abused and they don't tell nobody for whatever reason. That violation is there. And the first thing someone would like to say is that, oh, they like it, or they didn't say anything. Why didn't you say anything? Well, because there's a part of our brain that uh, is is work off of fear. So
Mm.
when we're fearful, when we're scared, when we've been violated and we don't know to talk that out and get some help, we tend to hold on to it because if I can tell nobody, it won't hurt no more. It hurts more to talk about it, but once you talk about it, then you feel better. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense, especially for someone like me who's gone through, unfortunately, more than one encounter with sexual trauma. And I remember just not being able to talk about it then and not being able to talk about it afterwards. And then also being confused because there's been encounters that happened to engagements that I did consent to, but then this individual took it to another level or did wanted to engage in things that I didn't want to engage in, and so you're saying, oh well, because I consented to it, is this partly my fault? But I think it's
Right.
also good to point out that sex or any type of engagement where you're talking about your physical body should always be consented on every step. So if there's a point where we don't consent, it can still be traumatic. At least that's been my experience. What do you think, Sam?
You're right. It, anytime you're violated and stretched more than you want to be stretched, and that's in any area of your life, be it sex, be it um, um physically by someone, anytime that there is a violation to you or your body or mentally, then yes, it can cause trauma. A trauma can be caused by as little as a kid's fish dying. That could be
Mm,
traumatic to that kid growing up. And we don't understand that traumatic events occur in our life. Some are severe, some are mild, some are not. But anything that interrupts your day to day functioning or things that you would like to do can be considered a trauma. Um,
mm,
and the reason I bring up the goldfish thing, because one time when I was in school, um, that's what the professor used to explain to us how trauma affects us. Now, he talked about the little kid who had a goldfish, and he would come in every day and feed that goldfish. And one day he came in and the goldfish was floating. Um, and the kid could not get that out of his mind. He dreamed about it. He talked about it until he became an adult, and he was able to talk about why death was bad for him, why
mm,
he feared death. He feared his kids. He feared his parents dying. And fortunately for this man, his parents did not die until he got to be an adult. His kids did not die until he was able to process fear and death. So,
mhm,
um, but that his goldfish dying when he was a kid grew up in him, and it grew up with that fear, with that fear of dying. So he always was overprotective of everyone that he loved because he feared
mm,
they would die. So who would think that it reached back down to a goldfish dying when he finally got some help for this fear that he had. It went way back in his history to that. So
mm.
that was something that stuck with me to know that um, uh,
Trauma. It sounds like trauma is
trauma,
based on
yeah,
perception, right? It's based on what
right.
you
It's
perceive to
based
be.
on perception. Exactly. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I think that's very important to note because my trauma might but not look like someone else's trauma.
Right.
The same thing I went through may not be traumatic for somebody else, right?
Right. Right.
So I think that's really good to point out too that everybody's story is different, everybody's trauma is different, and validating everyone's trauma I think is so important. Could you, Sam, break down what PTSD is and maybe like what its symptoms look like?
PTSD is post traumatic stress disorder. What post traumatic stress disorder is, it's a disorder that is a brain disorder that, when triggered, can take you into a hyper vigilant state. It can make you hyperarousal. It can have physical symptoms as well as mental symptoms. It can make you see things that you think are there that are not there. Um, PTSD is exposure to any type of traumatic event, violence, directly experienced by you, or you know of someone that has been directly experienced. Like you can be the one that get the actual um, you can you can get be the one that actually experienced the event, or you can actually witness the event of someone dying, of someone being sexually assaulted, of someone being seriously injured, of someone being, believe it or not, of someone being threatened can cause PTSD. Um, Sometimes in kids it look a little different than it do in adults. In kids 6 or younger, they tend to act it out with toys. You may see your kids put two dolls together, and they are kissing and doing things. Um, I'm not going to say that's 100% saying that that child have experienced something, but somewhere in that child's life, she has either seen something or somebody has physically touched her. Or you may see her beating one doll with the other doll. That may be some physical abuse going on. PTSD is um, in a large number of people. Statistics show that every 92 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. That means that every 9 minutes that a victim, and every 9 minutes that a child is being a victim of sexual abuse.
Wow. I think
So
that's
you think about how long we are on this call and how many kids may be. This is in the national network statistics. Incest, um, incest, people in the home, people who you don't think are the people who do these things. In the Black community, what I do know is when things happen sexually, um, usually it's a family member, someone in your home. And you know what? Usually kids do not tell. It's so much undocumented sexual abuse that go on because we don't find out until a kid becomes an adult. And when they become an adult, sometimes we find out by their behavior, and sometimes we find out because people want to just seek their own therapy because they know something is wrong. It's that void, it's that empty feeling, it's that icky feeling, it's the feeling of I've been violated. And I know, uh, um, Charnel, that you have personally experienced that. We get too far in that, I know that you yourself have been through that, and I know it took you a minute um, to come to grasp. And I can imagine that you had your own symptoms and behaviors, such as mistrust. You have a daughter. I'm sure that it was hard for you to leave your daughter somewhere because those are some of the symptoms that we encounter. Although we may not um, encounter, we may not see some of the normal symptoms that's written in the book, but I can tell you that trust is very hard for someone who's been violated. You know,
And
it can.
I know for me, for my daughter, like I was very protective of her. I think Kaden has only seen the daycare like it was a school program, and she didn't even stay all day. Like she was in there from 8 to 12, and my grandma was picking her up by 8 o'clock. I mean by
Right,
12 o'clock, and she spent most of her time with family because I
right,
had so much distrust, and it was not just any family; it was female family. So she was either with my mom, my grandma, or her aunt Ashley. Those were the three pillars that she was left with.
right.
And that did come from mistrust, especially from some of the trauma I experienced very early on. I think that maybe even going into a little bit about our history, and let me explain to people who are watching who don't know me and Sam. I've been working with Sam for about 2 years now, and I met her at a very actually Sam doesn't know this, but I met Sam after a huge traumatic event. Um, right before I got hired at the place we were both working at now, I experienced a really bad date where I had an individual not really want to let me out of his car, and it went pretty south, and that triggered a bunch of other childhood traumas that I had. So when I got to Sam and started working with Sam, you can imagine that my PTSD symptoms were just like off the charts for a clinician. For a clinician who's able to see this, for a clinician who's able to notice these signs and these symptoms. So she didn't understand where they were coming from. She was able to identify them. And Sam was so gracious and strong and brave to approach me because I wasn't her client. I was her coworker. And that's a different dynamic.
Right,
And
right,
it takes a different type of strength. You know what I mean? Because you're coming to your coworker and saying, hey, I see this. You know, maybe you need to, seek some type of support for this, and there's nothing wrong, and normalizing it for me. But I also want to give Sam the kudos to not only identifying and speaking up, but following through. Like she continued to be a resource for me to pull from when I didn't have anyone to pull from. And I had seen therapy, I had gone to therapy before I met Sam, and none of my therapists were able to identify these things in me. I was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia, but they weren't really catching the PTSD. And I'm a strong believer. I'm not a clinician or anything, but just in my own journey and looking through my mental health, that I want to say this politically correct, that it's very important that you do have multiple therapists, but it's very important that you also seek a therapist that is in your culture, as well as someone outside of your culture, because someone within your culture is going to not only understand your cultural background, but they'll be able to understand the trauma within that culture. Me, as a clinician, if I were ever to, I do want to pursue being a clinician, and I would love to support all races and anyone in any ethnicity, but I also understand that I don't necessarily understand fully the Hispanic struggle or the Asian struggle, and though I would support them with the information I learned, there's a different siren that I feel that goes off, because when I started, when I got with my work family here, there was a lot of mental health professionals that were Black. And so this is where a lot of my healing started, because they were able to see past other things that other cultures weren't able to see. No fault to those other clinicians. It was a cultural thing that they were able to take their education and identify. So I'm a strong believer that see multiple professionals, but also seek someone within your culture.
right.
And so we had to have well, Sam, why don't you, before we go into some of the symptoms you saw in me, why don't you list some of the symptoms that are with PTSD in an adult? Because sometimes, like you listed for the children, we can see it in their play, we can see it in their defiance, we can see it maybe in their hyposexual arousal, right? Some of our kids, like you said, victims become victimized.
Right.
What about
I
an adult?
want to throw this out here. You talked about, you went and you had some issues. You had someone diagnosed you with PTSD. I mean, with ADHD and all these different other diagnoses. The reason why we sometimes get misdiagnosed is because we have to understand that a diagnosis and symptoms and all of that may contribute to sensory versus conceptual. When a person is not able to, and I'm talking about the therapists need to be able to conceptualize what's going on. You can have a sensory ability to say, okay, she told me this is what's going on, but you gotta, if you can't dig deep into, somebody once told me, if you can't get an accurate history, it's hard to make a accurate diagnosis, and I believe that. So I am a little hard on myself with the diagnosing, because again, you touched on something as far as culture. When you don't know the culture as a clinician, and one day I think you would make a great clinician, so I think you should pursue that. I do. All you need is the paperwork. That's all you need is that degree. So I think that if you would pursue that, I think you will see that even though we are not diverse in every culture, um, you have the culture of being a clinician.
Mm.
And sometimes I don't always relate to Hispanics or to a different culture either. I think I connect more to our Black people. But every now and again, you got that African American who you don't connect with because you just see that they're so far gone. But that still can help you with the diagnosis because you know that that person is out of the norm um,
Mm.
of the Black culture. So you know that there's something there. Some of the symptoms you will see in adults is irritable, angry outbursts, because we as adults do have angry outbursts. We throw temper tantrums when you're refusing to do what others want you to do, when you're being unreasonable. Also, and that's with no provocation. And with no provocation mean no trigger, nothing set you off.
Mm.
You just went off. Um, Also, sometimes we are a little hyper vigilant. We have problems concentrating. We do reckless and self-destructive behaviors when you're out there on drugs trying to self-medicate. That's reckless and um, destructive behavior. I know our time is winding up. I did want to make mention that April is marks the 19th anniversary of sexual assault. We need to
Mm. I
always
didn't.
know that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month,
Mm.
and that's within the Me Too movement. They made that month sexual awareness, and it is very important to the population to continue to go for the people who don't notice, lurking in the shadows. Still is too taboo to even hear anyone talk about adult survivors. So, and children who suffer in silence, because we have a lot of them who suffer in silence. We have a lot.
The Me Too movement, can you touch on that? Like maybe the ratio between like boys and girls, or like something like in regards to that. Like, what is the Me Too
Well,
movement
I don't
really?
know for the Me Too statistic numbers, but what I can tell you in the national database that boys are just as likely to be sexually molested as girls. A lot of times boys were not talked about, and I would say to every 5 girls, a boy is also being molested. The numbers are still high in girls, but boys are molested at a high alarming rate number. I don't have that number with me, um, but
And
I
that's,
know that it
you
is.
don't have to have the number. I think that's really just acknowledging the fact that you're working with children. You see children that are boys that are being molested, or possibly have showing signs of molestation. What about? I think there's myths that I've heard, like that it's not always just a male molesting a child, right? This predators
But
could be male or female, right?
I'm gonna be honest with you. I actually know of a friend, a sister. My sister's longtime friend had a daughter who had a godmother. Who this was back in the early '90s. Um, the girl grew up to be a teenager and she started having a lot of kids. And this was before I became a therapist. I learned of this. Um, Come to find out, she was suffering. She had a lot of issues, a lot of symptoms of PTSD. No one know why because her mother raised her. But come to find out, she used to let her go with the godmother, and the godmother was molesting her to the point that she was sticking broomsticks, all kind of things up in her.
Mm.
Um, she also did oral sex on her, and this little girl at 3 and 4 could not. That's the memory she had of her godmother. She molested her repeatedly. So I looked it up and I found out that there is a large percentage of women who sexually abuse. We can talk about R. Kelly. R. Kelly was said that his sister abused him.
Mm.
So when he started the abuse, I was looking at the mental health piece of that, and I said something had to happen to him. And sure enough, it came out that the sister was abusing him and the brother. Um,
Mm,
Making them do oral sex on her and different things. So it causes a, a disarray in our cognitive to the point that we will um, victimize victims. You know,
yeah,
victims are victimized. So when we look down at the history, that's why it's very important to report. That's why it's very important to tell someone, because you know, just like this COVID-19, I want to say this has been a pandemic in our
yeah,
society. You
yes,
know,
yes,
you
yes.
know.
And
So
I think that's I love the fact that you mentioned that women can attack boys, and it's not always just homosexual predators attacking boys. When heterosexual women can attack boys as well, and I've heard so many of my male friends tell me these different stories and not think that they have been sexually traumatized and not think that they're dealing with some form of sexual trauma because they like, oh, it was a woman. You know what I
right,
mean? Oh, a woman did it. You know what I mean? But that still can cause different types of things and manifestations in different people. Like you mentioned with the goldfish situation that manifests in our adult life, right? That
right,
goldfish guy, he was like, oh no, nobody else is dying, all because of a
right,
little fish died. So
right.
I think that it's very important to tie that what happens in our childhood does follow us. And we need to even sometimes as adults go back and remember those things. And like you said earlier, process them.
and,
Have
and sometimes we can't remember. So, you know, if
oh,
somebody have some unexplained symptoms, I want to say this. If somebody have some unexplained symptoms or behaviors, you may have what is called an emotional block. And people with
mm,
emotional block tend to act out. And if that's what's going on, then you need to get in some therapy, get into someone that can help you unlock that stuff so you can get rid of that junk, throw it away, and be able to live a somewhat peaceful life. Before I get ready to go, I did want to say I thank you, Charnel, for having me on. This was a good subject, and I just want you to know that eh, um, every they say every five people, every five adults have one out of every five adults have been sexually abused in some or sexually or physically abused in some type of way. So I just want you to know that it's nothing to be ashamed about. It's nothing to be afraid of. Just know that we all have been through something, and that what makes us different is that we talked about it, we processed it, and we learned that it's not our fault. That's not something we did. That's something somebody did to us. And if you're a person that have done these things, just know that it don't mean that you're a bad person. It means that you need some help. And the only
right.
way you're going to get some help is to talk to somebody. You know, what makes you a bad person is when you do not go and get help. So seek
Especially
help.
when you acknowledge it, right? When you acknowledge that there's a problem and you continue
Yes,
to stay in that problem. I think
exactly.
once you acknowledge it and you seek that help, that support, you can make changes that you want to see in your own life. And so,
Right.
Sam, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here, taking time out of your busy schedule. I know that you're a clinician. You got kiddos that you are working with right now that are going through some things, and you still took this
Hey,
time
I
to
just
educate
want
the
to say
community.
this. I got a caseload of 11.
Woo!
Six of my kids, we had 13. Six of my kids, and I think it's eight, but I know for sure six of my kids have been molested.
Wow. Wow, that's more
Uh,
than 50% of your of
yes,
your
yes,
caseload, and that's
yes.
not even including the other two that
That
you
I
dropped.
have a strong inkling. Right, right,
Right. So wow, that just shows us how often and how common it is, and it allows us to at least not normalize the fact that it's happening, but normalize seeking help. Like
right.
let's go get help. Everyone, it's let's really take care of
Can't do it on
ourselves.
your own. Yeah, you
You
can't.
can't.
You
You
can't.
can't. I can attest. The
Yeah.
last thing that I did want to say before I let you go was one of the symptoms that I felt like I dealt with for a long time, and maybe not a long time, but just was unaware, and it felt like I was unaware for a long time, and was dissociation. That was one of the things that the symptoms that my clinician told me that I was dealing with, is when I
Mhm.
would dissociate and I would literally mentally leave my body. I would mentally
Right.
just be distant from my body. Sam, before I talk about dissociation, can you just say what it is? Because I know what I'm doing it, but I don't know how to explain it to someone.
Well, dissociation, I'm gonna tell you what it is real quick. It's the individual symptoms meet. Dissociation is a issue that you go, and it's kind of like you outside of yourself. You dissociate yourself with something that has happened to you. It's not reality. That happened to you. You were violated. You were hurt. You were traumatized. But what you do is you push yourself away from it, and you say, that wasn't me. That didn't happen to me. So you dissociate yourself. You disconnect yourself with that situation that occurred in your life.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it puts you kind of like not in reality.
Yeah, and that's something that I know that I've dealt with myself, and I know that my symptoms came out with when I experienced that event that happened. This event happened in June of 2018, and I know that I just lost all kind of care for myself and for my body. And so one of the things that did come up, and I'm just sharing this so that you guys all can learn from my mistakes and my pains, so that way maybe it's an acknowledgement for you guys. But I did struggle with body odor, and coworkers did have, well, one coworker came and brought it to my attention and was willing to sit down and tell me, hey, that this was going on. Were you aware? And for me, I was so disconnected from my body. Even though I was going to work every day, I was getting up and doing the things that I needed to do on a daily basis, but mentally I was not present. I was not with myself.
Right,
And because of the encounter that happened, I didn't even want to touch myself. It was really hard to get in
right,
front of the mirror and things in that nature. But once I got the help and the support of Sam, the support of my coworkers, the support of my family, I was really able to ground myself with meditation and really reconnecting my body. But I really want to normalize, like, even if we're seeing symptoms like body odor, that's a symptom of
right.
something else. Like, no one really just walks
Not
around going,
not so much the body odor, but the fact that you don't feel like you need to clean your body, because what you need to
right,
understand, most times with hygiene and in your recess, what happens is because a child or because a person was violated. Again, we go back to that word, you were violated, and because of that you feel like, if I don't take a bath, or if I don't clean myself, or if I pee all over this, not saying you had in your recess, but I know most of my kids that do. I feel like if I do this, they're not going to want to touch me. So that's where the disassociation come in at. I'm doing something to prevent something from happening, which not even acknowledging that it happened, if that
right.
makes sense.
No, that
You
makes
know,
perfect sense. I mean, and Frank is hypersexual. My boyfriend, he's hypersexual, so that could have definitely been why I increased that, because for me, going through those sexual encounters, I became like
exactly.
distant, and so that I could have been putting up that defense
Right.
unintentionally. You know what I
That's
mean?
exactly what you were doing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, see,
That's
and so
exactly what you was doing. Hmm.
I was telling him no without telling him no.
Right, right, right. Be like,
But
and really, you were telling him no because that was painful for you, and I'm not talking about physically painful, but mentally, he didn't understand
right,
how, when that should have been a time of pleasure for you.
right, right.
Because that's your mate, that's your soulmate. You're a consenting age. You're with this man. It's not
Mhm.
something like somebody's
Right,
taking something for you, but because you
right,
viewed it in those lenses of them taking it, at the violation, your body was violated. So
right.
yes, okay.
So I
So
just wanted to leave people with that, at least so I can, one, get that off my chest. Whew, one more thing off. It's almost traumatic to go through that whole
right,
space
right,
of having that, your trauma or your symptoms spill over into work, and people seeing a different lens inside of you. That can also be traumatic and a hard thing to live through. But I think once we accept it, we acknowledge it, we can really grow past it. That's the
Yes.
person I was. It's not a person I am today. I have a lot more um, coping strategies to keep me present, and I have a lot more support system, like Sam,
Yes.
to help me stay present, and I can really move past it. So that's just encouragement to say, whatever you're going through right now, you can seek support, you can seek help, you can set up your pillars, like how I have pillars around me. They're out there in the community. We're here. If you don't know where to look, put in the, we'll direct you in the direction to at least start to go somewhere to get the help you need. Um, Anything is possible. I really truly appreciate Sam on so many different levels. Sam, you have no idea how much of a role model you have been for me.
Thank you.
Because just your integrity, your amount of integrity. Like Sam will be in meetings, y'all not in our meetings, but Sam will be in meetings and be like, "Nope, that's not how that goes. Nope, that's not how we do it. When this child needs." So like, just you've been such a role model and such an
Thank
inspiration.
you.
I really am so.
I'm glad, and I'm glad you did that. You asked me to do it. I'm kind of a fusser. I'm like, Charnel, I got so much work. I ain't got time for this. But I actually was in a pretty good mood when I woke up and was determined to do this for you. So I'm glad, and I see that you have come a long ways. You keep up the good work. Keep trying to make sure that you know that you are somebody in this world and you have a story to tell. So tell it, you know? So thank
I'm
you.
working on it.
Thank you guys for having me. And if
I
you have any questions, please reach out to Charnel. She's more, I'll be happy to answer anything that you guys have. Thank
Yay,
you.
that's good to know. So we got questions, y'all. We can ask questions. I ask questions. We can
Right,
ask.
and that you should get. If anybody out there that needs help, seek help, seek help, seek help, seek help, seek help. It's not you. Okay. All
All
right.
right.
I gotta go.
Bye, Sam.
Thanks.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye.